Hello everyone, my name is Geoff Brighty and welcome to day 3 of the Blue Hope campaign webinars. We've got a theme today which is innovation for a circular plastics economy, and this session follows on from 2 earlier ones that were focused on how we might collaborate, so the Commonwealth Clean Oceans Alliance programme and also the Plastics Pact led by RAP, and how that's bringing together a whole range of stakeholders to address the challenge of how we recycle and best manage plastic within our lives. The last session, we just talked about the technology solution to how we might best recycle plastics using chemical recycling. And we had a presentation just now from Richard Daly from Renew ELP. And that presentation will be available shortly off the ADEX website and also the Blue Hope website. But now we're going to go basically back up the chain, and we're going to look more at the problem of plastic pollution and how we can go about understanding that. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Assistant Professor Soroush Abolfathi from the University of Warwick and their Warwick Water Group. So welcome, Soroush.
Well, hello, thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
And just to sort of set the scene for this session, what we really want to cover off here is about how science is enabling that, through its understanding, enabling the right solutions to come through. So from the problem definition, we end up with being able to identify the right solutions to be done. But just by way of a quick introduction to yourself, Soroush. So as I mentioned already, Soroush is Assistant Professor at the University of Warwick, and he's thematic lead for the environmental sustainability of Warwick global research priorities, so very much in this space of sustainability thinking and action. He's a member of the Warwick Centre for Predictive Modelling. So I'll just herald this now that Soroush is going to tell us a little bit about how he goes about doing environmental modelling. So I'm sure we'll all learn something about how challenging that is, but to know really what's possible is really key. So he's predominantly a modeller looking at pollution transport in the environment. So when material gets in the environment, where does it go? And therefore, what's the exposure of animals and the wider ocean to that pollution? He's had over 8 years' experience of quantifying how solutes, so materials in water, and particularly microplastics, are moving around the environment. So, Soroush, you've been involved with this really from the get-go in terms of how we understand microplastic pollution and what it's doing in the environment. So, importantly, in terms of understanding really how we sort of get to the solution piece, one of the things that Sylvia Earle said from her webinar on the very first day of the Blue Hope campaign was that we really didn't understand what the impacts are and actually value those impacts. We seem to get our air free that we breathe, or what's the ecological value of a mangrove, for example, in terms of what it's doing for the environment. We only value fish when they're caught and on a plate or in a fishmonger's or so on. So really beginning to understand how that impact piece gets going helps drive that discussion about we need to do something. But perhaps you can start us off really by looking at what is the impact, what's the value of the cost of that we need to be really alert to now.
Exactly. So what is the cost on the environment, and what is the hidden cost basically on the environment? So how much the future generation have to pay for what we are not, for the actions that we are not taking at this moment? I think that's a very key message that I'm trying to highlight in the beginning of my talk. So yeah.
By means, please go to share screen now and begin the conversation, because I think this is the right place to start from understanding the problem. It's not just about how we deal with waste; it's understanding the consequences and the impact that's now having.
Exactly. Perfect. So can you see my screen now?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can see only myself, so I just had to check. Okay. So good evening, everyone in Malaysia and Singapore. I'm very delighted to be here. Very delighted to be part of Blue Hope campaign. This is really exciting place to be. So I'm going to talk about pollution transport in marine environment, and I would have a very specific focus on basically modeling pollution transport and pollution transport processes in coastal environments. So I'm going to give you an outline of the talk, basically. So I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction, some facts and figures, where the pollution come from, the impact of pollution, etc. And then I'm going to talk about the theoretical background, so how we model pollution in the environment, and how we can measure this, how we can quantify pollution transport mechanisms in a very challenging nonlinear environment of basically marine and coastal region. I'm going to talk about some paradigm shifting findings of our research and how we kind of, found the missing puzzles of modeling pollution transport in the environment. And then I'm going to talk about some future research, very exciting future research in the region of Malaysia and a wider Coral Triangle region, where this is very much focused on plastic research. So how plastic basically impact this very important ecosystem in this region of the world. So first thing first, I'm going to ask you this question: why understanding the dynamic of pollution transport is a very important question. So to answer this question, if you look at these beautiful figures that I put you over here, and I very much wanted to be here. I mean, to give you some background for the people of the UK, I'm living in the Midlands, so I am as far away as possible from the coastal regions. And in the state of lockdown, you're really looking at this picture and say, God, when I can go back to this, beautiful scenes. So why this pollution transport in coastal and marine environment is very important? To give you some background, it's important to realize that around 3 billion people live in 100-kilometer stripe of coast. So you're talking about a region of colossal socio-economic impact. A lot of your industrial activity, economy activity happen in this place. And water quality in a specific, so understanding the pollution and making sure that you have safe water, appropriate water quality is very key to public health, to continuous economic growth, and to livelihood of many of these 3 billion people living in the coastal region. And because I'm talking to Malaysian and Singaporean at the moment, I thought it's interesting to mention that the tourism industry in Malaysia is a 220 billion Malaysian ringgit industry. And it pretty much rely on having a very high quality, coastal water in the country. So it's very important for Malaysia. This is specifically very important because of the tourism industry and because of its very important and rare marine ecosystems. You're talking about coastal mangroves, you're talking about coral reefs, you're talking about very, very important, ecosystems. So with that said, I'm going to talk about some facts and figures first on the pollution. So when we're talking about coastal region, no matter where you are in the world, whether you are in the UK or in Bahamas or in Malaysia or in Japan, every time that you enter a coastal water which is deemed acceptable, so those coastal regions that they have acceptable water quality, you still have 1 in 20 chance of getting sewerage-related diseases every time that you enter, or every basically bathing exposure that you have. So to give you a figure, so I can give you a figure in the UK. So in the UK, where probably around 90% of the water, bathing water, are deemed acceptable, every time that you enter a coastal region, every time that you have a bathing exposure, you have 1 in 7 chance of getting skin-related disease. So think about it, an upscale. I mean, you're talking about UK very high water quality standard, then go to, I don't know, coastal waters of Africa, Southern America, Southeast Asia, etc., etc. So you have really high, basically bathing-related disease at the moment. What is the cost? What is the economic cost of this pollution in coastal water? I think that's something very important. So UNEP, UN Environmental Program, this is, I think, 2017 report. They costed at $16 billion annual cost of pollution. So we're not talking about a basically a kind of affordable cost of keeping our water polluted forever. So with that said, I think this is just highlight how important is to understand the pollution transport, and then by understanding the pollution transport, having a proper water quality management scheme in the governance. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is that if you are trying to achieve sustainable goals, sustainable development goals, having clean water, tackling the pollution is directly linked with this sustainable development goal. So if you're thinking about pollution, then you're thinking about good health, you're thinking about clean water and sanitation, you're thinking about climate action, life below water, responsible consumption and production, and so on. So this pollution problem is a very challenging global problem that needs to be tackled like yesterday, not tomorrow, because of the cost. So this is about the importance, I think. This is like, some impact of pollution in our life. The next thing, so when we want to start understanding the pollution in marine environment, the first thing that we need to do is that what are the sources of this pollution? So where the pollution come from? So 80% of marine pollution comes from inland boundary conditions. So it comes from rivers, it comes from coastal development, waste, sewage water, inland activities, etc., etc. So this is, I think, again, 2017 figure of United Nations, 6.5 million tons of litter enter towards ocean every year. So to give you a figure, to give you an understanding of what does it mean, at the moment, when me and you are talking, Geoff, there are around 200 dead zones in oceans around the world. So what is the definition of dead zone? Dead zone is that when you have so much rubbish congregated in an area that it fills the surface, and there is no way that oxygen can go deep in the water. So basically no species can live in this condition. So when we're talking about these dead zones, 200 dead zones, some of them has a area of 70,000 square kilometers. To give you an idea of what does it mean, 70,000 square kilometers, it means that the area of Switzerland and Denmark combined. Okay. It's twice as big as Switzerland. And these are the area at the moment in our ocean that they are deprived of oxygen. There is no life beneath them. So this is the impact of our pollution on the environment. So 80% of pollution coming from inland boundaries. How about the other 20%? So the other 20%, it comes from what we call the offshore boundary. So at the moment that we're talking, around 90% of the world international trade tonnage is transported by ship. So we're using marine environment to transport all these goods. And according to, again, the International Maritime Organization, not my data, their data, over 50% of whatever is transported at the moment, within our marine environment are deemed as hazards for the environment. And on top of this, you have to add the 6,000 offshore oil and gas rigs that they have continuous leak to our ocean, and they continuously polluting the water around them. So I don't think I need to talk more about the source and the impact of this pollution in marine environment. So next I'm going to talk about, so what, when we're talking about marine coastal environment, what type of environment we're talking when we want to model this. So when you're talking about the coastal environment, what we call it nearshore environment, you have a very complicated flow field. So you have a combination of this, what we call it cross-shore and long-shore currents, that these waves, they are mixing together, they're driving the pollution, but as they mix, they create this very complicated, spatially varying, complex three-dimensional flow field. So this three-dimensional flow field makes it almost impossible to understand the behavior of pollution, to basically track where the pollution goes from point A and B, where does it end, etc. So what my team did, we tried to simplify and then model these processes so that we have a realistic model for predicting pollution transport, where is the fate, what is the impact, etc. So just to add a little bit on the complexity of the problem, so if you're looking at this, in my opinion, very pretty, exciting figure, it kind of vertical scale show the length scale of the processes that impact the pollution, and the horizontal scale show the temporal scale. So as you can see, they are very different. So when we're talking about a pollution transport, turbulence impact the pollution transport, but turbulence only has a scale of few seconds and few centimeters. At the same time, you have tides that also impact the pollution transport, and you can see that there is a huge difference in terms of both temporal and spatial scale. So what does it mean in terms of modeling? It makes my life much more difficult to incorporate all these changes into a single model and then run them at the same time. So I think now we know that the pollution exists, we know that it's a problem, and we know that the area that we're trying to model is very complicated. So what are our modelings? What are the overall challenge in this area? So first thing, we need to understand what are these underlying marine processes that govern pollution transport. Because if you have a pollution problem, the very first step before tackling the problem, before you're coming up with the policy, is to have an understanding of what will happen to this pollution in the environment. The first step that you need to know is that if someone throw a litter in Bay of Bengal, it will end up in Malacca Strait, and Malaysia has to pay the price for that. It's not Malaysia pollution, but it's someone else pollution that I have to pay for it. So then the next step is, what is the fate of pollution in the environment? And the last thing which my team pretty much work on this is that how we can build robust models that this model can predict the behavior of pollution transport and their impact on sensitive marine ecosystems. So around 10 years ago, I made a mistake and I said, you know what, challenge accepted. And the first thing that happened, I started looking at them. Of course, I'm a modeler, so I look at I look at the equations that, the advective diffusion equation. So the first equation that you see here, let me make it laser pointer, sorry, so that I can talk about. So this first equation that you see is the equation that basically govern the transport of any scholar, a solute, a microplastic, a sediment. We call it advection diffusion equation. So to give you a little bit of background in terms of the modeling, so this red parameter E here is what we call it the mixing coefficient. All of you, whatever water quality model to this date you have used, it rely on a single depth and spatial and temporal average value. What is the problem with this value is that you will have a colossal difference between what your model predicts and what is actually happening in the environment. So what I tried over the past 10 years, I tried to make sure that this E parameter, the mixing parameter, will be much further understood and enhanced. So to give you a little bit of very, very short background, because we need it in the next slides. So this mixing coefficient historically was defined as turbulent diffusion. So historically, modeler thought that the transport of pollution in marine environment is only a function of turbulence. What we did, and this is like over the past 20 years, people start thinking about what we call it advective shear dispersion. Shear dispersion is basically the difference in velocities. So you have very complicated velocity field, how the difference in these velocities will contribute to the mixing. In the first step, I mean, as you can just follow my equations here, it's just like too complicated to tackle. So you need to then just break it down to a different basically processes. So what we did and what we need to remember for the future slides is that our mixing is a function of this turbulent diffusion and shear dispersion. So turbulent diffusion, it's quite simple. I'm going to talk about it later on, but this advective shear dispersion, it's a real pain to solve it. As you can see, you have like this equation here for advective shear dispersion. No one ever said that, oh, I love to solve this equation, because it's complicated, as you can see. So what we try to do, we try to simplify it. We said that, okay, if you are in a near-shore environment, you have a wave bore going forward and you have a undertow going backward. How about we create some sort of block model? We run the model, we didn't like it very much. And then around 2012, I said, how about instead of having a depth average value, we have depth varying value, but we average them over time, so make it very simple. And then let's look at this equation. Let's try to solve it. So I said, challenge accepted. Let's try to solve it. I came up with these equations. I had, of course, a lot of, PTSD solving these equations. But the good thing is that some mathematicians gave us some, really robust tools for ordinary differential equations. So, long story short, if I derive this equation and I spend like a couple of hours talking about them, at the end of the day, we came up with these equations that give us the exact solution for dispersion. And this is like, if you're a modeler, this is a game changer, because from an approximation, you come up with an equation that you can actually solve it. So we said that, okay, now we have all the tools that we need. Let's see if our mathematics work. So what we did, we went to a large-scale wave current. So we went to a large-scale facility which basically model whatever happening in the ocean. So you have an exact ocean condition here. And what we did, we run some very complicated measurements. So what we did, we measured the velocity at different locations within the water depth. And we also look at the tracer dispersion. So we poured a little bit of what we call it a rhodamine water tracing dye. So we poured this pink fluorescence material in the water, and then we start looking at how it mixes. So what is the mixing of it? Without going to the detail of the measurement, so what we ended up with the actual mixing from the measurement from these tracer studies, and we had a very valuable data set of hydrodynamics, because we wanted to build our model based on this hydrodynamics. So Mac is not usually your best friend. This is Mac usually lets you down last minute. This is a presentation. Sorry, this is a video which will not work because Mac told me that you don't have the right thing to make it work. But it would just show you how how basically the tracer transport. But long story short, we kind of, let's go back to laser pointer. I like that. This laser pointer give me a feeling that I am still in a lecture and I have an actual laser pointer, so it's kind of helping. So what we did, we started looking at analyzing this tracer basically measurement, and we got the actual, what is the actual mixing coefficient. And then we tried to basically rebuild the same thing using the hydrodynamic data, when we realized that, well, marine data are not the most user-friendly kind of data set that you can ever get, because first you have huge spikes in your data set, and you have data scarcity because of the complication nonlinearity of the system. So it just delayed that a little bit, and then we had to come up with some basically method to get rid of our problem. So we had to use some fancy mathematics. We got rid of our bad data. And what we did, so quantifying the first mechanism, turbulent diffusion. So what you see here, the experiment, so what we got from our hydrodynamic model, and the blue line is the theoretical, well-established theoretical line. We are doing very well. In fact, we're doing better than the theoretical model, because what we realized that your mixing just landward of the wave breaker is actually a little bit higher. So it is really good result. But when we look at the second mixing mechanism, the shear dispersion, that really important one, what we realized that when we add our hydrodynamic model and using the mathematics that I mentioned, when we are at the breaker point, when the location that the waves start to break, our model still is much far away from what is the measurement. So the model is not predicting very well. And at this point, we thought, okay, maybe we are missing something, because we stayed there, we analyzed the data, reanalyzed the data, cried, we did everything, but we couldn't make it work. So then I went back to the lab and I was like, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there is a parameter that we haven't looked at. So this time what we did run some, so we had some very high power laser, which I always like to play with, but didn't have an opportunity to play with. So it took me like a few months to tune this laser. So what we did, we created this, so we had a wave machine, and then we kind of wrapped this wave machine so that no light can, can entrain into the system. So you had this pitch darkness, and then you have the laser basically line shining a column of water. And what we did, we started looking at different locations, and we ran some very complicated algorithms to analyze the data. But when you analyze the data, you see stuff like this. So what you see first the direction of the flow, second basically the velocity. So looking at this, you probably don't, it's quite difficult to understand what's happening. But when we look at this, we had very high frequency data. So we look at the waves at every 0.001 second. So you're talking about lots of data in a second. When I analyze all this data, I noticed this. I noticed that when you're looking at the waves within a wave cycle, you have the majority of your wave cycle, you have the undertow mechanism. So you don't have much shear. Shear is actually small. And the maximum shear happens where you have the collision between the undertow and bore. So when this, the incident wave hit the previous reflected wave, at this location, you have the maximum dispersion. And it came to my mind that instead of having a temporally averaged mixing, how about having variation of mixing in the time domain? So I started looking at this, and you can see the result, which the result is quite pleasing, because it showed me that actually the mixing at some stages are quite small, and then it goes down for a very short period, and then go back to the background. So when I analyzed the data, what I realized with this new mixing, basically with this new parameter, looking at the temporal variation, our model prediction is very close. It's like, this is like, the first time ever that a model can be so close to what is the measurement. So I was really over the moon. And we said that, so we were exactly like this. The person on the left, if you're wondering who he is, this is Sir Osborne Reynolds. So the very famous Reynolds number. So I was as happy as Reynolds number in this figure. And we said that let's put this into a numerical model. So we developed a numerical model, and we add in our mathematics to this numerical model. So we validated. I usually talk about the model quite a lot, but I know that the people are probably already bored with the modeling. So I'm going to go to the result section. So looking at the result, when we did the numerical model, we had even better results. So you can see that the prediction of the model with the prediction of what we actually measured are exactly the same. And we find the same trend, that the dispersion is a function of time. If you are trying to think of dispersion as a time averaged value, which all the numerical model at this moment, they have time average and space average, it's not going to work, and you're going to have the problem. So we were very happy actually about the result. And so we published the result. We were very happy sitting in our office, and then we came to this problem, the microplastics in marine environment. And we asked ourselves, can we do something about this? And then again, we said, of course, yes, we can do something about it. So we start very academically. We said, okay, if you want to tackle the microplastic problem, first of all, we need to know what is the kind of most abundant type of plastic in the marine environment, how they behave, what would be the underlying equation that we can add to this system and solve it, and then how we can quantify this. So we did a little bit of test study. We talked to people, we read the news, and we came up with this bad boy, polyethylene. So polyethylene is the most common type of polymer used for single-use food packaging, basically. So we thought that, okay, if we want to do something, let's start with polyethylene. Let's see how polyethylene behave in the environment. So we did a little bit of research. We realized polyethylene is actually have very close density to water. So the first thing that came to our mind is that if we want to understand the behavior of polyethylene, can we say that polyethylene will have the same behavior as solute? Because if it does, then we have a model for it. So this is what we did. At Warwick Water, we use a specific type of basically dye called Nile red, and we had polyethylene, powder of polyethylene. So on the left, what you see is Jake. Jake is injecting Nile red into polyethylene. So polyethylene will have fluorescence property so that we can trace it in the environment. So, sorry, Jake spent hours and hours and hours. This is, I think, something like 6 hours. So Jake spent hours and hours to create this, basically fluorescing barcoded particles so that we can inject it into the stream, and then we can look at the dispersion, the behavior. While I was doing this research, I realized something which is, I think, very valuable. I realized that the youngest, on the left, you see all this student for a year, they gave up all of their Wednesday afternoon coming and helping me with the research, because they were very conscious of the environmental impact of the pollution, and they wanted to do something about it. And I think this is, I mean, the people who studied in the UK, Wednesday afternoon is your day of fun. If you give it up to stay in the lab, I mean, it's really big. So with the help of the student, with the help of our existing project, so me and my colleague, Dr. Pierce, so we ran these like experiments, and Dr. Sarah Court, which was the PDRA at that project. So we ran number of series of experiments looking at the behavior of tracer and the behavior of microplastic. So dye, tracer, and microplastic. And we got these figures. So on the left, you would see the dye, so it's a kind of solute dye. And then on the left, you will see, on the left it's dye, on the right you see polyethylene. So what we did, we analyzed all of this, and what we realized that the microplastic, when you're talking about polyethylene specifically, mimic pretty much tracer. It mimic the basically solute. So it acts like a solute transport, as you can see on the figures I presented on the left. And what we did, we rerun the basically the model for a series of Reynolds number, basically showing different environmental conditions. We got the same result. If you have a mobile phone, you can just scan this, and it will take you directly to the paper that we published in Water Research, which is like most prestigious journal in our field. And so what we did next, so what's next? Next, I had it through a existing funded GCRF project. We came to Malaysia, and we realized that Malaysia is a biodiversity hotspot within the Coral Triangle biodiversity hotspot. It's an area of immense environmental importance. And at the same time, we realized that Malaysia is one of the most polluted countries in terms of the plastic pollution. When you're looking at the west coast of Malaysia, Malacca Strait is one of the most polluted straits in the world. When you look at the east coast, because of the interaction from South China Sea, there's a huge amount of pollution coming to this very beautiful country. And we thought that I think we can do something about this. So what we did, we start having conversations. So from Warwick, we start having conversation with the help of British High Commission in Malaysia, with the Malaysian government. So I think Geoff is as well. We are the very last people who have a picture with the name of MESTEC. So for those Malaysians, so Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, so a very big ministry that now is, I think now is just broken down to two ministries, rebranded as MIWA, if I'm not mistaken, Ministry of Water and Environment. Yes. So we talk to them, and we start to understanding what is the problem and how we can tackle this problem in Malaysia. Then I shared my thoughts with the UN Environment Program and the Chatham House. They were very excited, so they joined the call. We talked to University of Malaysia, we talked to Plastic Ocean and Reef Check and so on. So you see all these logos here, we talked to them. And what we did, we co-developed a very comprehensive program of research to understand the impact of specifically plastic pollution in Malaysian waters, in Malaysian coastal and marine environment. So on the left, the two figures that you see is the two study locations that we propose and we are going to study. The first one is in the state of Johor and the south of Malaysia. So we are looking at a national reserve, a Ramsar site of Tanjung Pilai, which has mangroves, it has coral reef, it has seagrass, and very importantly, it is very close to a site of major industrial importance. So it is very important for us because it is at the south of what we call Malacca Strait. So all the pollution that comes from Klang Valley and the north of Malaysia and the Bengal Bay will have to pass this point before the South Indian Ocean gyre. So it is really important. The second site is in Sabah. So the second site is in Sabah, and it is very important within the Coral Triangle. This is a very sensitive, ecosystem tourism area for Malaysia. So with this project, we are not only looking, Geoff, at modeling, we are looking beyond the modeling. So first, we want to understand the fluvial and marine plastic hotspot, how these hotspots interact, how people behavior, how industry impact this hotspot. And then we want to look at the multi-scale, basically pollution transport and the fate of this pollution in the environment. So we're not talking only now microplastic, we're talking micro and macroplastics. So how they interact with these ecosystems. And I think a very important piece of puzzle here is that we want to also understand the microbial and marine biology aspect of this. So what is the impact? What is the potential for basically microbe and virus to use the pollution, to use this plastic pollution as a hitchhiker mechanisms so that they can transport from A to B and so on. And the most important part of this puzzle, in my opinion, is that how we can use all this information to come up with both marine and I think inland as well is very important, inland waste management policies, how we can help better shaping of policies with the help of people, with the help of local authority, backed by science. Yeah. Scientific evidence is very important, because if you go to people and tell them, you have to just not use this plastic, you have to pay double the price to use, I don't know, something equivalent of that, they would say no. But when the minute that you tell them that, look, this is the cost that this is the hidden cost that you're avoiding at now, but you will have to pay it at some point, I think it will change the game. And my last slide, sorry that I talk a lot, I usually talk more, but yeah. So what we're trying to achieve with this Impact C project, we are trying to create for the first time a near real time basically model of spatiotemporal plastic hazard. So we are going to create this plastic hazard map, which will help local authorities, will help government, environmental agencies, and the people to understand and understand the water quality in the region, and also understand what does it mean in terms of the impact of that for their ecosystem, and so on. So I think that's the end of my talk. I'm going to finish here, and I hope it was useful.
A little bit. For the moment, we've got a couple of questions coming through. I mean, just to recap, I mean, the Impact C project is just been submitted to a program in the UK called Global Challenge Research Fund. It obviously has many academic partners that you've worked with in the past, and obviously those that you've met recently, including the Ministry of Environment and Water, which is very much interested at the heart of trying to get the science evidence in order to drive evidence-based policy. And I think that's the critical bit. There's no point in doing this science for the fun of it. It has to have an impact, and hence the title. So I'm just going to go back a little bit in terms of the value of modelling, because it seems to me as though there's a lot of effort to go and try and predict where this material goes. And we've had a question from a gentleman called Harry Chan, who's talking about doing coastal zone ghost nets recovery, was finding all sorts of waste that was coming from many, many miles away. And the same question arose on Monday with Paul Rose, around marine protected areas. You can designate an area, but this stuff just drifts across. So the models are really important to try and demonstrate to people, if this stuff enters the environment at this point, it will end up over here because of ocean modeling. And if we want to protect these areas, we've got to do something upstream. We've got to protect this stuff going out.
Exactly. And I think how modeling can help this. If you remember in the beginning, I did mention this, that the plastic pollution problem that Malaysia is dealing with is not necessarily Malaysia problem. It's someone, up in the Bengal Bay, littering in the coastline, and it ended up there. So how this modeling can help. So this is also part of impact. So what we want to do, we want to identify this hotspot, and this hotspot can be identified using satellite imagery. So what you can have multi-layer models, where in one layer you have the satellites. Using the satellite, you can map, where are these plastic pollution, where is the pollution coming from. In the second layer, your model, what it does, it kind of tell you that the plastic pollution that someone, I don't know, in India put in the coastline, in 5 days' time, that would be in Malacca Strait. So then you would have me thinking about, at the moment, what I'm telling you, it's almost impossible because of it was no real effort to do it. Second, computational cost, the resources, blah, blah, blah. But it's, with our advancement in technology, computing technologies, with advancement in, satellite imagery and, interpreting like kind of real time this image, I think we are getting very close that in the next 5 to 10 years, you can exactly, the government of any country can go and say, look, this pollution came from your side, and we saw it like 10 days ago using the satellite, something like that. So I think I don't know if I answered the question properly. So the model can help in that sense. Also, the model can help you in the sense of, if you have a pollution problem and you want to come up with set of strategies to tackle the problem, the very first step before you coming up with any strategy is to have a detailed understanding of the problem. And the model will give you that detailed understanding. It will tell you what is the impact.
And it just sort of building out from that a little bit, the Commonwealth Clean Oceans Alliance webinar that we had this morning was about how countries were coming together to try and discuss this common problem. And it will hopefully, what the model will be able to do is to, as you say, attribute where waste is coming from and the impact it's causing, but then also enable then the conversations to happen around those governance tables to say, this is actually a collective problem. Your waste management situation over here is leading to an impact over here, and also, we know you mentioned tourism being such an important, economic driver, but of course it's as much it can be a cause of the problem because people litter on beaches, but it's also a victim of it as well. So it's important that attribution of where the pollution is coming from a governance point of view, is key. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm just going to just turn the point to, aside from the impacts project, it's important we start to look upstream in terms of where the waste is coming from in our rivers and how to address the waste management side of things. So just elaborate on some of the thinking around the projects that you're now thinking of developing in parallel to impacts, where impacts is on the ocean side, if you will. What can we do upstream to try and make the waste management be improved, and what science and governance needs to go alongside that?
I think the waste management, so inland waste management side of the research is really important, because if your basically models, marine environment models or project want to be successful, you need to have really very very detailed inland waste management policies in place. So what I'm trying to do, and I think you know a little bit of that as well, is that a parallel to the impact, which look at the marine policies, we are trying to develop a land-based waste management
project, which we're looking at the different areas. So like in Malaysia, within Klang Valley, where I think around 30% of population of Malaysia live there, is a huge socio-environmental, importance kind of region. Or in Johor Bahru, where you have like, a kind of like congregation, all these very important industries. So what we're trying to achieve with that project, the way that we are developing it, we want to focus more on citizen scientists. So we want to engage more with the people, with the local communities, and understand their problem first. It's like modeling again. If you want to have a proper model, you need to understand what is this underlying, barrier, underlying problems that you have. What is missing from the inland waste management policy in Malaysia or in anywhere? And the idea, I think, Geoff, it's very important to mention this. The idea of the project that we're doing in Malaysia or anywhere else, these are all scalable.
Yeah.
So we do
to bring it to a
pilots.
close, I'm afraid, Soroush, we're out of time. I'm sure we could talk for hours about this, but thank you so much. We look forward to seeing the Impact project taking forward, and also the work that we want to do around the waste management and the governance and working with communities, because that's also hugely important in this. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Soroush, for a very engaging presentation and introduction to our modelling and whiteboard.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.